Thanks, Jeff. We probably did something different because we're new to the whole thing, and really didn't know what to do. It was a new experience for us, and so we took an approach to a design presentation that we use on every other type of project that we do, and so I think it's what we try to do in our firm is one, to come up with a creative solution, a unique design that fits the space, and something that, in the process, hopefully we're having fun, to be honest with you, because we think that landscape architecture, one of the things about landscape architecture is it really can be a fun experience. It can create a lot of really cool, exciting, creative opportunities, and so that's kind of part of the underlying core of what we're trying to accomplish. One of the questions Jeff and I were having was who would be in this meeting. We were going, will there be landscape architects, will there be engineers? And as I look around the room, I'm seeing mostly landscape architects, so I'm kind of curious, how many in here I was going to ask landscape architects, but I think it'd be too big. How many of you are in the engineering side of this? So actually, probably half. That's good. We're really glad that you're here, because I think for the landscape architects, while what we're going to show is our process, my guess is that a lot of this you're doing. And the process is not something that you're going to say, well, that's different than what we do. It's probably the way we're documenting the fact that we brought it together and we pulled it together in the formal. And I think what's really helpful is to show to the engineers maybe some of that background. If they're not experienced, it's some of the way we think, because quite honestly, we think differently. I think as landscape architects, we think of ourselves as a little different, and I think my experience is engineers think of us as a little different. We may think of ourselves different in one way, you may think of us different in another way, but overall, we kind of think about projects in a very different way. It's a subjective sort of evaluation. It's something that has a higher sort of, in our mind at least, sort of we're thinking about deep issues, deep social issues. When we get into a roadway project, I love sort of these, we have this like memorable experiences. And it doesn't matter if it's a road, or if it's a building, or if it's a convention center, or whatever. We want to make that space special. We want you to remember it. And so it's a really foundational part of what we think about. But a lot of times our dreams sort of are subliminally thought of as your nightmare. How do we implement these things and be responsible? How do we fit it in with sort of the structure of all of the engineering aspects or the architectural aspects that have to be a part of the project? So why discuss process? And why are we here talking about this today? And I think for me, when Jeff asked me to do this, that was my biggest question. It's one thing to come in and I could simply go through what I showed Jeff and show you that, but it's more important to tell you, and for those of you that may not normally be landscape architects, why is it that we do what we do? And hopefully we can sort of paint a picture for that for you. But the biggest thing is that I think we just think differently. We think differently, we've been trained differently, we look for different things, we understand things different in a much different way than we do. And that process is therefore very different. Two, we believe that the foundation of what we're doing is to add context. To add sort of that underlying layer of movement, of space, of definition, of things that are not necessarily always thought about in an engineering world. We believe, as landscape architects, that we offer an opportunity to improve your projects so that they're more sustainable long term, and we also believe that aesthetics and beauty benefit society. That it's a really important aspect of what we're trying to accomplish. I love this image. I hope you can see it. This is actually an image of Central Park in New York City. Central Park was actually, for landscape architects, this is, we've all studied this, but Central Park was constructed originally in about 1860, the late, 18, it's a big project, it took a little while, but it was in the mid to late 1800s. And what it talks, the reason why I love this project is that as the city continued to develop and grow in New York City, the preservation of Central Park became central to everything. It became that sort of preserved, sustainable place that was so important for the community. And it required this long-term vision, this really incredible vision to create something special that would be, that would not just be something that would last for 10 or 15 or 20 years, but something that was transformative, something that would be really durable and lasting. And so today, as you see the city, which is completely grown up and all around it, you see the preservation of this very, very critical and important landscape inside the city. So although this is an extreme exaggeration of what we're talking about today, it's foundational, I think, in what we think of as landscape architects oftentimes, at some layer. It was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. Landscape architects know him as the first landscape architect in the United States. He did a number of projects throughout the country. If you haven't studied landscape architecture, he may be new to you, but he was really important to our country. And he did a lot of work, but he established, there's well-documented principles that he used. And I think today they're still very relevant. And they're relevant in what we do as landscape architect. And whether you specifically talk about them when I'm speaking to the landscape architects, you probably inherently incorporate these ideas in everything that you do. And so I'm going to try to weave some of these into the process of what we're talking about today. So our process, and when I say our specifically our firm, but I think corporately probably everybody, is one, we really want to get to know the road. And I say that is get to know the road because it's about knowing this road. It's about understanding the road. It's about trying to get a feel for what this road is really trying to accomplish outside of just moving people through a particular space or integrating people. It's much deeper than that. And so there's a process for getting to know and understand the road. One, we always talk about opportunities and constraints, but that catchword is very important. And in our context of this project, as I'm going to show you, it probably is more about identifying the constraints, because constraints on a roadway are extremely important. And oftentimes what we find is that if you don't understand your constraints up front, you have the potential to make a lot of mistakes down the road that are costly, or from a landscape architecture standpoint, they begin to deteriorate the idea. And so as the idea erodes, the purpose of what we've invested our time and our energies and everything into become to be less important. And so when we want to establish something that's really important, we want to protect that. So you protect it by understanding what your constraints are and working within those. We want to learn from past experiences. And I think that's the same for engineers. You're constantly looking at your past experiences as far as safety records and how to make the roads more safe. It's a big issue. From us, safety is also very important. Safety, tree placements are very important. How do we really maintain visibility? How do we do all of this and still maintain those things that we've learned from? But not only the safety and not only that, but it's also what is increased maintenance problems? Which plant material have performed well in particular environments? We don't have much irrigation out there. That's a big issue for us because, believe it or not, plants, especially once they've been plucked out of the ground and moved to another location, they don't like their new house so much because they've been sucking water out of existing ground and now they don't have those connections. It's like they have to establish a new family of soil and roots and everything over there, so that takes some time and it's hard to do. So learning which ones perform better in which environments is really critical. Understanding the local ecology. Local ecology in Florida, if you work like we do, most of you probably do, across the state, you find every ecology, we've got a variety of different microclimates and ecologies and different spaces that really perform well. There's different plants that work in Tampa that don't necessarily work here in Orlando. We do a lot of work up in Gainesville area. We've got a whole different palette of materials up there. Sarasota, Pinellas County. Even Pinellas County is different from Hillsborough County. So understanding which plants and which materials work in each environment is very important. Also, the culture, the character of that community is very important. You know, so the waterfront communities are very different from the inland communities, or, you know, the middle of the state communities. They have a different feel. So when you're doing urban environments, for instance, you know, it has a different character. The plant material reflects that. So understanding that is something we want to do, because we don't want to rubber stamp a solution throughout the community. We want to make something that really works for that particular community. Then once you've done all those 4 steps up there, and I think, you know, again, we're probably all doing them to some degree or some process, you know, then you can start to design. Really, you know, the mistake that we often do is we get a project and we've got a limited amount of time to work on it, and we're going to then race to a solution or race to a conclusion that might be right or might not be right, but we come with a preconceived idea. And so we want to make sure that we get the order right, that the order comes after we've done all of this other work, that we understand everything, so then we can start to design within the parameters. And then communication. And communication is something we don't talk about a lot, but communication is key. So I'm going to talk to you about the 2 projects that we presented to Jeff. There are 2 projects. They're really, you know, in terms of FDOT type projects, not large. These are 2 roadway projects. They're on US 19 in Pinellas County. They are going to be bid. They're not part of a design-build project, so we have the ability to work directly with the design and landscape architect. Dan, you know, was working, sort of helping us along the way. And we had a $430,000 budget. So both of the projects, US 19 at Pinellas Park was an interchange. It's sort of these teardrop interchange, if you will. They're angled places. And then US 19 in Tarpon Springs, and let's see, where's the wrong button? But this is Tarpon Springs Avenue right there, Tarpon Avenue. So we have this big median up here. So as we start through the process, you know, we want to take that first sort of Frederick Law Olmsted philosophy of understanding the genius of space. You know, what is there to work with? Because, you know, the least costly, the most valuable, the thing that you're most capable of using and taking advantage of is that thing which is already surviving, which is already there, which already makes some sort of sense. And if you can understand that and build upon it, you actually have the potential to make, you know, greater projects. So we're not just adding to something and trying to create something, we're actually contributing to a larger context, if you will, a larger community. So, you know, we will start by working on aerials. You know, we just kind of, aerials, we use a lot of aerials, you know, we're just trying to get a sense of what this is. So we'll collect a series of aerials. We use everything that we can possibly get. And we collect these things, we cut them up, we put them in storage, and we sort of hold them off into an area. We'll study them. I mean, this is really basic. I'm sure everybody is understanding, but, you know, Bing is a great resource because it allows us to sort of look at the place from a variety of different locations. We'll use those aerials to kind of understand the context. We'll do the Google Streets, you know, to drive the road. We actually drive the road, but Google Streets gives you the opportunity to stop in the middle of the road and take a picture, which is not available to us when we're out in the field, typically. I don't know if anybody else does that, but that's the way we do it, and so we can start to understand what those views and vistas are. When we go out into the site, we'll spend a lot of time out on the site. We start just sort of doodling. This may be something that we do, I don't know, over the past several years, you know, 10, 15 years, there's been an enormous growth in technology. And technology has really made a huge impact on everything that we do, and communication is a huge deal, you know, but the design process has also been impacted by technology. We now have software, we now have, you know, Google Streets, all these things are resources that are available to us that weren't available to us before. We can now take projects and put them right into CAD, we can take surveys, we get them 3-dimensional, we can build the models, we can do all this sort of stuff. The problem is, in my experience, is that what happens is that we often lose our connection with the details, with the specifics. We sort of move so quickly through the process that we sort of miss something. And so we try to slow that process down. We try to slow that, and so we try to really understand what it is. So we'll go out on the site and we'll doodle. You know, we'll try and understand, well, what is the impact? So for instance, you know, looking at a particular entrance and the fact that the power lines, how does that impact you when you're there? You know, it's a very visible thing that it impacts you when you're in the site. So we're trying to understand that, and we're collecting those images as we're walking through the site. You know, how does the scale of the landscape, how does the road start to read? You know, what are the things that happen, you know, as far as just trying to get a better sense. Again, we're just trying to, you know, sort of look and understand this road experience. You know, when we're there, we're walking the sites, and I'll tell you that when we walk the site, what we're looking at is details. You know, we've already we have the survey, we have all of such. We're just really trying to document the specifics. You know, what are the materials that might be there? How do the drainage patterns work? What are the issues that are affecting the site? You know, do we have, you know, erosion issues? Do we have vegetation issues? Do we have problems with adjacencies that we have to deal with? We're really trying to understand much more the specific locations and get a handle on that. So these are a bunch of photographs. And then we will, this may seem redundant and silly to a lot of people, but in our office, we take the survey, we take the aerial, and we draw the plan. And we actually sit down and we hand draw the entire plan. We don't need to do that anymore. You know, we've got enough technology to not, but what you learn from drawing that plan is you follow sidewalks, you see where sidewalks are connected, you see how they, you know, you ask questions, and it helps in the process of learning the site. And it becomes this background that we build our entire design upon. Now, one of the things that I didn't say, was meant to say right up front, was, you know, what I'm talking about in this talk is really the design analysis phase of the project. You know, we've got this whole design, you know, the plans preparation phase, which is going to happen. But we're taking this design analysis phase and we're trying to do as much as we can to nail down and make sure that we're correct on all of our assumptions and all of our design processes and design conclusions. So when we end up at that plans preparation and we have the hours, you know, 8 hours to do this drawing or whatever hours we have, that we truly don't have a lot of design decisions that are there. So everything is kept pretty much in this design analysis in a hand-drawn area. We keep it that way. So these are just some drawings. We'll document that now and go right to something that I cheated. I put this together just for this presentation. We didn't show, Jeff's never seen this image, but I wanted to emphasize, I didn't have this drawing, I didn't know where it was. But, you know, the idea of, we take this plan, we document the things that we're trying to capture. You know, we had this sort of airplane that was a visual icon there. We had a fountain, we had some views of the water. We had, you know, this complete neighborhood that we couldn't see into. It was, the vegetation blocked your views. We had these commercial vistas that aren't really, they're kind of cluttered and they're very busy. So we wanted to sort of identify where those were. We didn't have billboard issues, so we wanted to just sort of document all the issues and document what we wanted to do right up front and before we began to design. You know, I don't know if it's just me and my experiences, but I think a lot of times that the idea that landscape architects are interested in or understand or engaged in the process of engineering solutions or understanding engineering solutions is it really is a critical issue, and we find that every project you know, we learn how much shrub material should actually be on the project. That's a big debate today. You know, whether we should have any shrub material or just do trees, you know, sort of thing. Where, you know, when we do have shrub material, why is it there? What purpose does it serve? How are we going to maintain it? What has been successful? So if you're going, you know, if you're landscape architects and you're trying to understand whether we're going to put trees or shrubs or just trees on the project, you know, it's not so much to think in terms of, well, there's no opportunity to do either of those. In my experience, what's true is that you have to understand why you're doing it. And you have to have a really good reason for doing that.
It has to be defined, and it has to be proven that it will be successful. You know, and you can't just sort of think that you're going to put something out there and it's going to survive in these environments, or that, you know, somebody won't have to maintain it. So you have to design into it all of those aspects, and you have to think through that. Not that we're going to get it wrong, because, I mean, look, we're learning from past experiences. Those are mistakes, and we continue to sort of evolve in this process. But we do want to build upon what's already been done. So we did a lot of sort of driving around and looking at other plants and other projects that have recently been constructed, and trying to understand what are the issues that we particularly will see with those roads. What are we doing right now? Why are we doing them? And understand them, and try to assess whether some element that's been part of that project works. Like maybe the arrangement of the plant material is something we're not interested in, but the particular plant material planted in a certain location does give us some information that we can then use and build upon. So we're taking that at its core, not at its sort of global sort of, you know, trying to say, oh, Washington palms, you know, they work. Well, they might not, you know, but they might work in a specific location. So trying to parse it down to how it works. And then we're trying to just determine what would be there if we weren't there, or, you know, and not to, I will tell you that there's a lot of push, and for us, we do a lot of work in trying to reestablish native plant ecologies, or working with native plants. You know, we have to understand that oftentimes we're working in disturbed sites with disturbed soils that are not even close to being native. You know, so to push native is not always the right thing, and it doesn't always work. So you have to understand why you're there. Having said that, there's a lot to be learned by looking at what was there originally and why it was there. So we try to look at that. And if these pictures tell you some of the things that we found were important culturally in our particular areas, the fact that there was, you know, throughout most of Pinellas County, originally it was saw palmetto and longleaf pine was very important. The fact that, although this picture is not in Pinellas County, as any landscape architect will know, but it was, I wanted a picture and I couldn't find one that showed this sort of connection between water, sand beach, and sort of the palm and sort of the mangrove and all of the culture. I'll show you one here in a second. You're going to see. I just didn't want to throw it up there quite yet. But this became sort of an important identifier to us because the water is very important to Pinellas County. It's why people are here. It draws people to the water, and that connection to the water becomes very important. So we get down to design. Once we've finished all of this, we're going to, now we have this sort of overload of information, this documentation of all of this stuff. We understand the site, we understand the ecology, we understand the local environment. We're going to start sort of taking this information and applying it to a particular site location. So now we go down into these sort of, what do we do? So when you start looking at the values that we follow from Olmsted, you know, one is that we're not looking to do a single thing necessarily. You know, we want to make sure that we're fitting in the context of the community. We're not looking to make things that are, you know, I love this, the art is to conceal the art. I mean, you know, I think in all of our design, what we're trying to do is create these spaces. You know, I bet most of the landscape architects would agree. I mean, we want you to experience this sort of underlying sense of beauty. You know, this underlying sense of sort of comfort, of excitement. You know, there's pleasure, you know, there's just all this, you know, when you go to a site and you feel like, wow, this is really nice, and you can't really understand necessarily why it's there. You know, those are the sort of things that we're trying to understand and create. So how do we create them? We want to subordinate details to the whole. I love this idea because oftentimes we look at, you know, we get bullseye focused on one thing, and we start to look at that and we try to accomplish a whole bunch of small things instead of looking at how do we do a large idea and make a large idea really work. And then, you know, I think avoiding fashion for fashion's sake, you know, it's easy sometimes to start to do the same thing, you know, or the trendy thing. And maybe there's a particular plant material that's just been announced and we're like, or that's really popular right now. And so it's working over here, so we want to use it over here. It's become this sort of thing. And it's just because it's interesting and engaging. A lot of times, in the political realm, we get pushed that direction by people that are, in the local communities. They start to say, well, I want this or that, or, so we have to try and resist that, so that we do things that are very long focused. Going back to, Central Park, the big idea, the idea that we're really creating places that are going to live a long time. They're going to evolve. They're going to, if they work well, they're going to exist well beyond us. Trees have this ability to stay there for hundreds of years, transform. Today we plant a tree, next year it's going to be different. The next year it's going to be different. Tomorrow it's going to be different because the wind's going to change and something's going to happen. We have to understand that. So we want to try and avoid sort of fashionable solutions. So we start looking at this, these two projects, and these are our initial sort of sketch ideas that we're doing. This is the Tarpon Springs project, and we started saying, what really needs to happen here is these businesses, which, if you're doing work on a right-of-way, you understand how important it is to protect the visibility to those businesses. As much as we would like to design and, our solutions, it's, at some point along the way, those businesses are going to be vocal. And their survival is very important, not only to us as a culture, it's important to the state. It's important to everybody. So we want to respect that. So we felt that was a very important aspect of this project, because although we had this massive amount of right-of-way, it was quite extensive, a couple hundred feet, or I don't remember off the top of my head now. It was like from the property line to the roadway was about 140 feet, if I remember, something like that. These businesses all faced out to US 19. They were all turning towards the road, and they're sitting way back off the road. And so they had signs, they had their business signs, they had their front doors all facing our direction. And yet when you drive along there, you would know that Arby's is over there, or Taco Bell is over there. But you had this space in between that was like, how do we do something here that doesn't, that makes them feel like they have something special? So, or gives them an address, if you will, gives them a purpose, this landscape solution a purpose. So that became sort of an important aspect. So we started saying, what's really critical is that we create view corridors through landscape. And we make sure that in the process of designing the landscape that we have significant amount of view corridors in order to preserve their visibility to the outside, so that there's signage. And so that became a question, and these actually have specific points, like when in certain intersections, or certain places, it's not so much in this is really a rough concept, but I'll show you in a minute the other drawings. We started to look at how much of a view corridor we really wanted to have. Then the other thing is that we wanted to make sure that visibility was not just, not just in clear spaces, but it was also in a transparent zone. So we want to have a visibility through trees, and that began to sort of influence us. In Pinellas Park, we started to talk about, in the throes of an urban sort of sprawled sort of community where, Pinellas County is just this 900,000 people, and it's very dense. It's a lot of moving people. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. We wanted to simplify into a single idea. We didn't want to have, just throw up a wall of palm trees or throw up something that maybe has been done before. We wanted to try and come up with a single opportunity for somebody that's moving, through this space at 50 to 60 miles an hour that might just sort of reflect on and have an experience with. So that was two different approaches to the design. We sort of locked onto this. I told you that we had a water, the beach that was with the covenant, was not appropriate. We locked onto this image for Tarpon Springs because Tarpon Springs is very much connected with the water, the Anclote River, kayaking, there's beaches, there's a lot of experience there. It's a beautiful river space. And we started to look at, the character of palm trees that have been in this space for a long period of time. Obviously, these have an understory canopy, which I'll talk to you about. But we started talking about and sketching these ideas of how do we create this sort of natural environment? How do we take that back up into the landscape? We began to look more closely at where these things could be, and then we we constructed islands. This image may be a little bit difficult. I should have enlarged it. I can't do it here. But these are actually landscape pods. For instance, there is an island of landscape that fits between major view corridors. In other words, at this intersection where we want to make sure we have plenty of visibility to see their front door. Some of these trees, by the way, were there already, so we're not adding the trees on the backside. But we created these sort of places where we could concentrate our planting in order to minimize our maintenance, and then we surrounded the entire planting area with shell rock in order to minimize the amount of maintenance. We made that very deep. We put boulders out there in order to just sort of activate this space, because you know what? Boulders don't die. They tend to age nicely, and a lot of people really like boulders, so we can get them. There's a lot of them around. And then we argued in these locations to actually incorporate things like, salt palmetto and yucca, where we could do something at the ground plane that would be very durable in very low water conditions, because those were natural environments, and if they were in spaces where there was no maintenance around them, we could reduce the amount of maintenance that would be required. So what we've done is, by creating these spaces, there are these little oases. This is, and it creates this visibility. This is a Bismarck palm, which is drawn to maybe appropriate, but it's a little bit low. But so that we could maintain this visibility through the space, so that you had that opportunity to sort of see it. This study is part of what we were doing. And then the landscape becomes that sort of character. And then this becomes sort of the sketch that we end up with. And again, we're staying in, we do all this by hand. I believe that the visualizations that we can do today that are very realistic are really powerful, but they also leave little room for you and in communication. They remove a lot of the opportunity to discuss the process and discuss this. And we're staying in design analysis. This is not the finished product. We're communicating the idea. So these are the presentations that we actually took these to the city council, and we presented them, and they were very excited about it. But the purpose of this is to show the idea that the landscape is low, the perimeter is this shell rock finish. The cabbage palms are not designed to be all the same height, all the same size, all the same spacing, all the same, so that they have the ability to, one might die. Instead of having to replace that, we can take it out. You're not committed to that process. If one doesn't grow quite so fast, it doesn't look out of place. They have a tendency to do those sort of things. So, we found places where we could buy curved palms, or, and we decided, well, we're going to lean them over. We're going to do all kinds of different stuff in order to make it somewhat unique. And believe it or not, landscape architects, this concept was approved. Glenn, somebody needs you.
No, they don't.
As I mentioned, in Pinellas Park, our idea was to do a single point of landscape. Rather than to spread our money out and to do a lot of sort of elements throughout the space, the idea was to do a single major sort of planting. And we wanted it to be on this axis, so that as you came across here, we could have a significant amount of landscape that didn't impact any of these visibility corridors that we need to have. It didn't impact any of the utility corridors. It didn't require maintenance to go around them and lawnmowers to do all this sort of stuff. It allowed us to create a huge massing of small trees that would then crowd out everything underneath them, so that it would basically create a canopy of small, native trees. We used cypress on the back side of this, and because cypress does wonderful. Everywhere you look in Pinellas, Hillsborough County, and probably most of the state, you're seeing cypress that just, they're probably, in my opinion, they're one of our best plants, because they don't let you down. They perform. They're one of the few things that you can really count on. And then we actually sandwiched in between here, it's a little difficult to see, some Bismarck palms in this one. We wanted to have a mid-level palm that wasn't too expensive, that didn't have palm problems, that would give us some character. We have a lot of palm problems in Tampa, you know, with especially medullas and those sort of really character palms. We wanted to have something that would connect people with the idea of palm trees, and we also wanted something that stood out when everything went dormant, and we were going to allow things to go dormant. So that became the solution, and you know, we articulated it in a design sketch so that we can sort of concentrate this idea, and then we package all of this up. And we, you know, I didn't bring to you today just the sort of pages, but the 11 by 17. All of this stuff is documented. It's all laid out, just like I said, each project individually, and so it's got the case from start to finish, how we got to our solution. And you're seeing a couple of different presentations molded together, really, because, you know, once we get to one presentation, we finalize it to the next stage. But basically, if I go back today and pull the file, you see what you've seen, except for that one diagram that's quite loud. So, you know, so why do we design the process? You know, I think for me, it goes back to this quote by Michelangelo. You know, because I think that oftentimes what we fail to do, you know, or what we do is, you know, the problem is we don't aim high enough, you know, and miss it because we're afraid to. We aim too low. You know, we don't push enough, and we easily accomplish those goals. So, you know, for us in our firm, and I think honestly for most landscape architects, you know, we want to aim higher. We want to give you something, you know, if you're an engineer or community or whatever, we want you to see something that's really meaningful. And so we hope to do that. So with that, questions and comments. Yes?
I'm an engineer, so I'm always thinking from an engineering standpoint, but you have a standalone landscape project, and it's in an urban area. What steps do you specifically take to ensure you coordinate the avoidance of underground utility conflicts?
It's a good question. We do a lot of that. We do the same process. We're doing one in Gainesville for the CRA, where we have the same utility conflicts there. And in actuality, it's held the project up because we did some conceptual designs early on where we had gas lines were documented. We worked through the utilities. We identified their clearance zones. And when we put their clearance zones for the utilities that are already existing in the roadway, we saw how we had very limited capacity in order to do the concepts that they came to us and said they wanted to do.
Well, I'm just curious, how do you go about identifying those utility conflicts? Are you actually coordinating subsurface utility engineering techniques, or are you working with the locals and they're getting that information that you are requesting, or how's that work?
All of those things, to be honest with you. It depends on the project. A lot of times we don't get sued, you know, so we have to be dependent upon the existing maps, you know, which are, you know, if we're doing a city project, maybe not a DOT project, they might be limited for what they're actually willing to invest in a project. So for them, we'll go back to the local agencies and we'll give them, you know, we'll request the maps. Most of the time, we're working in concert with an engineering firm, and so we're requesting that through them. We're not doing this, our firm oftentimes, like for instance, all of these projects, we were a sub-consultant to Elman Engineering. Don Byer over here was our, you know, assisted us. He did a great job and he worked really closely with us. So when we would need something, we would go and ask him. But it's either through the local agency and their maps, which are, as you know, sometimes not always that great, or it's survey, and sometimes we get, you know, the underground utility. It kind of depends on what it is. Some of the stuff is actually in the DOT. I think in most of this we found was pretty good because there was existing information, like the gas line. We nailed it down.
I guess I just wanted to mention these two projects followed a 3R project in both cases, knowing and resurfacing. So we took those plans and that topography and the utility information that they had gone through on those projects and used that as kind of the base map, the base CAD files for their work and build on top of that. And we went through the typical utility clear process that you would for any project.
Right. No,
This guy brings up a good point.
but this is
Standalone, we don't.
yeah. That was my point. It's I'm talking about a standalone project. If you're a sub, I can see how those activities
I see what you're saying.
As a standalone, I'm just wondering, do you know what information you need to be requesting and who you have to go through to verify that that information is accurate?
And you need to be scoped to do that.
Right.
Yeah,
You
you-
have to go to do utility coordination on the same level as what DER would be. That's really critical. You understand that during the scoping project.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically, we've done quite a lot of this, so we might not know all of the people. We might have to rely upon you, like, for instance, you know, the ITS systems and some of those sort of things, which are not typical on all of our projects. You know, we may have to say, okay, who do we go to this? But it's like a checklist that we can use at that point in order to say who are the people. And we'll rely heavily on the people that we're working with, you know, to help us gather that information. But it's, you know, I will say this, that we probably don't have the relationships necessarily with some of the agents, you know, some of the utility companies and people that are implementing, that engineers that work in that area do commonly, but it's not difficult to find the information if you ask the question.
I think the easiest way is probably to sunshine one call. You can work with utilities that way. Sometimes they do added bills. Sometimes there's old lines that are no longer in service. Or new lines. And we found that that's a good tool. And we usually coordinate directly with the utility manager in the district.
Sometimes it's an education to the client that that's part of a scope that needs to be added, that they need to be willing to pay for, because it is critical. The landscape art is critical, it is. But a lot of times that they don't want to have a utilities a specialist come in to help guide that. They're taking the risk as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of the landscape plans that I have seen, they do not have subsurface utility engineering. No, there's no utility plot subsurface. And there's a note usually that tells the contractor to call Sunshine One Call, and if there's a utility in conflict, you move the landscape. We don't move utilities to landscape.
Right. That's our experience. Yes?
So I'm neither an architect or an engineer, but I'm a planner and I write scopes and I sometimes don't know exactly what needs to be included and I work per jurisdiction. And so is that something that FDOT funds as part of the standalone landscape project? Because we're approaching doing a few of those and writing scopes for that, but I had never thought to include that component, but obviously it's critical. But even if I put that in my scope, is that something that FDOT would fund as a part of just that project? I don't know that you know that answer, but I don't know if anyone
Yeah,
from
I would-
FDOT is in the room.
Yeah, well, one thing that a lot of standalone projects that we work on, is there's a utility coordination process. And the folks in utilities take our plan at a certain level, send it to the folks in utilities, they get all the agencies involved, they review it, they mark up the plan, and then it works its way back to us. And then it has to be signed off, utilities has to sign off on it before we can proceed.
And we've just found, and maybe it's just I'm tired of, you know, people not, you know, we're getting too far down the road with the concept, you know, or we're given something, and then we discover that it can't be implemented, you know, and you go, you know, somebody's going to be disappointed a lot of times. You know, I'll give you an example. We did 56th Street with Element, and we were handed a conceptual plan for that street that said, you know, we've worked through this and we like this. This is really the kind of street we want. You know, and it's got these great big oak trees, and we're going to have this canopy, and it's going to be really awesome. You know, but it was in the absence of understanding that there was a 48-inch drain line underneath the right-of-way, right where those oak trees were going to go, and it wasn't moving. So, you know, at some point you're having to walk back those ideas, and you want to do that up front. So that's why we want to, you know, we try to do that right up front because it's a big waste of our effort, our energy, and everything else. So, you know, for us, it's, you know, we want to do it there. How What? Did I really?
We're
Right
there.
there.
You did?
I'm sorry.
What? You can keep going, because we're going into Jeff's time now.
Oh, no wonder he's. One more.
When would you aim towards simple reforestation as opposed to more detailed, explicit, landscape design?
I think every project has its own sort of inherent solution that we're responsible for finding. And simple reforestation has its place, typically in places where you would have more space, obviously, because you're having to understand the local environment. But whether it's an urban environment, obviously reforestation may not be something in an urban street. What we try to do in the process is to understand what are those solutions that make most sense in that particular area. And I think there's, especially in rural environments, simple reforestation would be very much a part of what we would be thinking about, because we want to sort of establish something that works back, sort of heals the land. We do a lot of that in a lot of our other projects, where we're looking at sort of restoring the place back to what worked, what was there originally. So I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry we're out of time. I spoke too long.